Let's be honest. This is a story most of us already know by heart. The crucifixion has to be one of the most frequently depicted moments in all of recorded history. Good Friday, in particular, is ground that's been covered again and again in nearly every medium imaginable. Trying to say something new here is genuinely difficult, because it's not like this is uncharted territory. There are dozens upon dozens of films and television series that have already taken a crack at portraying those final hours. This isn't a story that's a few decades old. It's been told and retold for roughly 2,000 years across paintings, sculptures, stage productions, sermons, films, and television specials. Local churches and community theatre groups put on their own versions every single spring. So the real question becomes, how do you take something this familiar, this exhaustively covered, and make it feel like you're seeing it with fresh eyes?
That's really the challenge Lewis Legacy has leaned into from the start. Because if there's one thing this project has never shied away from, it's doing things differently than what's come before. Audiences might remember one of the most talked about cinematic versions of this story, which leaned heavily into the brutality and physical suffering of the crucifixion. It was raw, unflinching, and frankly, hard to watch, to the point where it doesn't feel like something you'd want to sit a child down in front of. And honestly, there's a real question worth asking. Is the graphic suffering really the piece of this story we should be most fixated on? Is that the lens that captures what actually matters here? What sets this retelling apart, more than anything else, comes down to one word: time. This isn't a story being introduced to the audience out of nowhere. There's been an entire journey leading up to this moment, built across 5 full seasons of character work. Real relationships have been established, real histories have been laid down, and because of that groundwork, both the people making this show and the people watching it have developed a genuine emotional investment in each character. Not just the ones we're supposed to root for, but even the characters history has cast as the villains of the piece. These aren't cardboard cutouts standing in for good and evil. They're written and treated as actual people, with motivations, doubts, and inner lives, not simply as plot devices dropped in to move the narrative from point A to point B. Part of the motivation behind revisiting this chapter of the story was to dig into the nuance that so often gets flattened out in shorter retellings. If you've ever sat through a Good Friday service at church, you probably know the general shape of what gets discussed. It typically begins with the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane and moves forward through the crucifixion itself. That's the traditional arc, and it's a meaningful one. But that compressed structure isn't really how this show operates. The goal here isn't to parachute viewers into the middle of the action and expect them to piece together the stakes on the fly. Instead, the intention has always been to bring everyone along for the ride, to make sure no one feels like they're missing context or meeting these people for the first time in the middle of the most pivotal moment of the story. That's really the heart of what makes this version feel distinct. We're not experiencing these pivotal, widely known events as strangers looking in from the outside. We're experiencing them alongside characters we've spent years getting to know. People whose personalities, flaws, fears, and growth we've watched unfold episode after episode, season after season. By the time we arrive at this moment, it doesn't feel like a historical reenactment happening to unfamiliar faces. It feels like something happening to people we've come to care about, which fundamentally changes how the weight of the story lands. So if there's one word that captures what separates this Good Friday story from all the others that have come before it, it's empathy. Not shock value, not spectacle, not simply retracing the same beats audiences have already witnessed in the dozen other adaptations. It's the accumulated emotional connection
built patiently over time that allows viewers to feel this ancient, endlessly retold story in a way that feels personal again, maybe for the first time in a long while. What really comes through is that we end up feeling something for every single character on screen, not just the ones history has painted as heroes. There's a moment where someone insists on leaving, and another where a character admits he can't afford to look weak in front of others. What's happening underneath all of it is an honest, unvarnished look at humanity itself. Flawed, contradictory, and painfully real. Take Matthew, for instance. In the earlier seasons, he comes across as someone who doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the group, someone hovering at the edges rather than fully belonging. That's a feeling a lot of viewers recognize in themselves. Or look at Judas. Instead of the one-dimensional greedy schemer he's so often reduced to in other tellings, this version presents him as an idealist, someone swept up in devotion to a cause, willing to follow wherever it might lead, even without knowing the destination. For centuries, Judas has been shorthand for betrayal, cast as the villain without much room for anything else. What this retelling does is give him back his humanity, someone driven by genuine belief, whose desperate hope was simply for a promised kingdom to arrive.
Then there's a character like Shmuel, wrestling openly with doubt, essentially asking, if you are who you claim to be, what exactly is your plan? We watch him wanting to believe, staying open to it, and then ultimately pulling back and rejecting it. And that internal struggle carries so much more emotional weight than simply having a background character labeled a Pharisee standing in a crowd. The Pharisees, historically flattened into a single angry, hostile mass, are given individual names here. We follow them as people. We come to understand their perspectives, their temperaments, their attitudes, what they actually believe. The point of digging into this tragedy with that kind of depth is realizing that not everyone present in that moment was driven by malice or evil intent. Many of them were simply acting out of confusion, out of not fully understanding what was unfolding in front of them. We're told simply that the disciples fled, but fled almost undersells what was really happening. They were helpless. They were being hunted right alongside everyone else caught up in that moment. Nobody was really ready for what came next. These characters are written as greedy, as selfish, as ashamed, as afraid. Deeply complex people, capable of being both lovable and infuriating, sometimes within the very same scene. And that's exactly the point. Everyone watching can find a piece of themselves reflected somewhere in this ensemble. So when we watch these same characters witness an event that's been dramatized and performed countless times before, it hopefully lands differently this time, more personal, more immediate. That's arguably why we turn to storytelling and art in the first place. We're looking to be seen, to recognize ourselves in something larger. No matter how much this show grows or how large its audience becomes, that intimate connection to each character remains intact. You see fragments of your own life reflected back at you through them. And that's really the reason so many people were drawn to being part of this project to begin with. It's simply not comparable to the versions of this story so many of us grew up watching as kids. Get used to different. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Before you head off to the next video or close the tab for the day, it would mean a lot if you took a second to like this video. And if you're feeling extra generous, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. It genuinely helps our team, and it helps the algorithm put these videos in front of more people who might enjoy them too. And honestly, the more people who get to see this, the better. So thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and sharing Lewis Legacy with the people around you. It really does make a difference, and we don't take it for granted. At the end of the day, what we're really talking about here isn't just another retelling of an event that's already been dramatized more times than anyone could count.
It's an attempt to answer a much harder question. How do you take something the world has seen 1,000 times over, something etched into paintings, sermons, films, and stage plays for 2,000 years, and make it feel like you're encountering it for the first time? The answer, as it turns out, was never going to be found in more graphic violence, more shock value, or a more technically polished version of the same old formula. It was found in something quieter and, in some ways, much harder to pull off: time, patience, and genuine character work. Because by the time viewers arrive at this moment, they're not meeting strangers. They've spent 5 seasons walking alongside Matthew as he struggled to feel like he belonged. They've watched Judas not as a caricature of greed, but as an idealist whose devotion curdled into desperation. They've seen Shmuel wrestle honestly with doubt, wanting so badly to believe, and yet unable to fully let go of his skepticism. They've watched the Pharisees stop being a faceless, hostile crowd and start being individuals with names, histories, and convictions of their own. And that's really the quiet innovation at the center of all of this. The insight that tragedy becomes more meaningful, not less, when you understand that most of the people swept up in it weren't monsters. They were confused, frightened, flawed, and human, doing what felt right to them in a moment they didn't fully understand.
That's why the emotional core of this retelling doesn't come from spectacle. It comes from recognition. Every person watching can find some fragment of themselves in this ensemble, in the fear, the shame, the selfishness, the loyalty, the doubt, and the quiet hope that runs through every character, hero and so-called villain alike. That's the reason storytelling exists in the first place, not simply to document what happened, but to help us see ourselves inside of it. And when the audience watches these deeply familiar characters walk into an event that's already been performed and painted and filmed more times than anyone can count, it doesn't feel repetitive. It feels personal, because we've earned that closeness over years, not minutes. So when someone asks what makes this version of a 2,000-year-old story worth telling again, the answer isn't found in bigger production values or a bolder visual style. It's found in empathy, the kind that only comes from sitting with these characters long enough to actually know them. That's the through line of everything discussed here. Not a new story, but a new way of standing inside an old one, shoulder to shoulder with people we've come to care about, watching history happen to friends instead of strangers. And that, more than anything else, is why audiences keep coming back to Lewis Legacy. Not for something entirely unprecedented, but for something told with enough patience and honesty that it finally feels like it belongs to them too.